There are things you expect to see on Route 3 between Charleston and Nitro, West Virginia, at 2 o'clock in the morning. Semis hauling chemicals from the plants along the Kanawha River. Pickup trucks running late shifts at the mines or early shifts at the rail yard. The occasional deer frozen in a headlight beam with that look in its eyes that says it has made a terrible decision and is aware of it. You don't expect to see a boy. You especially don't expect to see a boy carrying a pillow. Everett, Ballast, Kline saw the boy at mile marker 37, southbound, in the breakdown lane. He was riding his 2019 Street Glide back from a Thursday night officers meeting at the Blackjaw MC clubhouse in South Charleston, and he was doing 55 in the right lane because Route 3 between Charleston and Nitro is 4 lanes divided with a concrete median and a 55-mile-per-hour speed limit that nobody obeys except the trucks hauling hazmat and the bikers who've seen what a guardrail does to a human body at 70. His headlight swept the breakdown lane on a long straightaway and caught the shape, small, vertical, moving south at walking speed, carrying something white against its chest. Everett was 46 years old, 6'2", 280 pounds, built like a railroad tie, and for approximately the same purpose, to hold weight, take impact, and stay where you put him. He'd worked for CSX Transportation for 23 years, starting as a track laborer at 20 and working up through the maintenance of way ranks to foreman, the man responsible for a 40-mile stretch of mainline track through the Kanawha Valley, the man who walked the rails with a gauge and a level and a trained ear that could hear a stress fracture in a rail before it became a derailment. His body was the body of a man who'd lifted railroad ties and swung spike mauls and operated tampers in 100-degree heat and 15-degree cold. Thick, dense. The kind of body that doesn't look athletic, but can work for 16 hours without stopping. His beard was black with gray at the jawline, trimmed close. The kind of beard a man keeps short when he wears a hard hat for a living, because long beards and chin straps don't coexist. His forearms were sleeved in ink. His left arm carried a detailed rail cross-section with a spike driven through it, surrounded by the tools of track work. A spike maul, a rail tong, a track gauge, a claw bar, all rendered in black and gray photorealism with the names of his crew members etched into the tie plates. His right arm was a Kanawha Valley sleeve, the river winding from his wrist to his bicep, the chemical plants on one bank and the mountains on the other. A CSX locomotive crossing a trestle bridge at the center of his forearm. His knuckles were tattooed in block letters, rail on the left, gang on the right, because the men who build and maintain railroad track don't call themselves a crew. They call themselves a gang, and they have since the 1800s, and they will until the last spike is driven. He wore a black leather vest with the Blackjaw MC center patch, a jawbone fossil embedded in coal with a crack running through it, his sergeant-at-arms diamond, and a small brass rail spike pin on his breast pocket that his father had carried for 31 years on the Norfolk and Western before CSX absorbed it. Subscribe to Asphalt Angels and hit that notification bell, because this story starts with a pillow on a highway and the question that nobody asked until a biker slowed down. Where is this boy walking to at 2 a.m., and what is he walking away from? The Blackjaw MC had been founded in 2009 by 8 CSX railroaders and retired chemical plant workers in the Kanawha Valley, the narrow strip of industrial West Virginia where the river runs between the mountains and the chemical plants, line both banks like sentries, and the railroad tracks run parallel to everything, because the railroad built this valley the way veins build a body, by going where the resources are. The club had grown to 20 members across Kanawha, Putnam, and Cabell counties, all of them men who'd worked the industrial spine of West Virginia, track workers, plant operators, pipe fitters, the men who kept the chemical corridor running, and the trains moving, and the infrastructure of the valley upright. The club's philosophy came from the railroad: Keep the gauge right. In railroading, gauge is the distance between the two rails, exactly 4 feet, 8.5 inches on standard track. No more, no less. Because if the gauge is off, the train derails. Applied to life, keeping the gauge right meant maintaining the distance between yourself and the people who matter. Close enough to carry weight, far enough to let them move. Everett passed the shape at 55. His brain registered it. Small, white object, breakdown lane. And then the tow truck driver brain kicked in. Except Everett wasn't a tow truck driver, he was a railroad man. But the instinct was the same. Something on the right-of-way that isn't supposed to be there is either debris or a problem, and problems get worse at speed. He checked his mirrors. He took the next turnaround, a gravel median crossover a quarter-mile ahead that the highway department used for maintenance vehicles. And he came back northbound in the left lane and slowed as he approached the shape from behind. A boy, maybe 11 years old. Walking in the breakdown lane of Route 3 at 2:07 in the morning, southbound, wearing gym shorts and a t-shirt and sneakers with no socks, carrying a pillow against his chest with both arms wrapped around it, the way you carry something you're not willing to put down. The pillow was white, a standard bed pillow, full size, clutched against his chest with the kind of grip that said this object was not luggage. It was the one thing he'd grabbed. Everett pulled the street glide onto the shoulder 30 feet ahead of the boy. He killed the engine. He left the taillight on, red, visible, a signal in the dark that said, "There's something here. Slow down." He didn't approach. He swung his leg over the bike, and he stood on the shoulder, and he turned to face the boy, and he waited. The boy stopped walking. He stood in the breakdown lane 20 feet from Everett, holding the pillow, looking at the bike and the vest and the man. The highway was empty in both directions. The Kanawha River was somewhere to the east, invisible in the dark, audible only as a faint sound beneath the silence. A chemical plant across the river had its stack lights blinking red, slow and steady, the heartbeat of an industry that never sleeps. "You're a long way from a bed," Everett said. His voice was the voice he used on the rail, low, carrying, the frequency that cuts through diesel noise and ballast grinders and the ambient roar of heavy equipment. "That pillow looks like it wants to be somewhere horizontal. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Asphalt Angels." Because a boy was walking down a 4-lane highway at 2 a.m. with a pillow, and two things are true. He had somewhere to sleep, and he chose not to sleep there. The boy didn't run. He didn't step back. He stood in the breakdown lane, and he held the pillow tighter, and he said, "I'm going to my dad's house." "Where's your dad's house?" "Nitro." Nitro was 11 miles south. This boy had been walking on a 4-lane highway in the dark, in gym shorts, carrying a pillow, toward a town that was 11 miles away at a pace that would take him 3.5 hours, which meant he'd arrive at his father's house at approximately 5:30 in the morning, assuming he didn't get hit by a semi, or fall into a ditch, or simply run out of the ability to keep putting one sneaker in front of the other on the gravel shoulder of a road that wasn't built for walking. 11 miles is a long walk at 2 in the morning. I know. You want to tell me why you're not at home? I am going home. Mom's house isn't home. Dad's house is home. Mom's house is where I sleep, but it's not home, because home is where you're safe, and I'm not safe at Mom's house. Everett stood on the shoulder, and he heard that sentence, and it landed the way certain sentences land. Not in the ears, but in the architecture, in the load-bearing walls of a man's understanding of the world. Home is where you're safe. 11 years old, and this boy had already learned the difference between a house and a home, and had decided at 2 in the morning to walk 11 miles on a highway to get from one to the other, and he'd brought a pillow, because the pillow was the only thing in the house that was his. "What's your name?" "Owen," Owen, I'm Everett. People call me Ballast. What's happening at your mom's house that made you walk? Todd. Todd is what's happening. Owen said the name the way you say the name of a weather event, not with emotion, but with the flat acknowledgement of a force that shows up and does damage and leaves and shows up again. Todd moved in 5 months ago. He yells at my mom. He broke the TV last week because he was mad about something on the news, and he threw the remote at it, and then he threw a chair at the wall. He locks the basement door from the outside when he wants to watch his shows and tells me to stay down there. My room's in the basement. He locked it at 9 o'clock tonight, and I heard him yelling at my mom through the floor, and then it got quiet, and the quiet is worse than the yelling, because the quiet means he's done yelling and he's doing something else. So I opened the basement window, and I climbed out, and I grabbed my pillow off my bed, and I started walking. Why the pillow? Owen looked at the pillow in his arms. He held it a little tighter. My dad gave it to me when I was little. It's from my dad's house. My mom got custody, and she got the house, and she got everything. But my dad said I could take one thing from his house, and I took my pillow, because his house smelled like his house, and the pillow smelled like it, and I wanted to have that when I wasn't there. I wasn't going to leave it. Todd threw away my other stuff, my baseball glove, my books. He said I had too much junk, but he didn't throw away the pillow because he didn't know it mattered. If you're watching this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes 1 second, and helps these stories reach the people who need them. Now, back to the story. Everett texted the Blackjaw group chat. Route 3, mile marker 37. Kid walking to Nitro at 2 a.m., carrying a pillow. Domestic at the mother's house. Need brothers. GPS pin. Gage responded first. Vice President, retired chemical plant operator. 7 minutes. Then switch from Nitro. Then Ballpeen and Coupler together from South Charleston. Then Crosty from St. Albans. 5 riders, all of them out of beds or off porches or out of garages, pulling on vests in the dark, starting engines in driveways where the neighbors had stopped complaining years ago because the neighbors understood that when a Blackjaw phone goes off at 2 a.m., it means someone needs something that can't wait for daylight. Everett took off his leather vest, and he held it out. Not toward Owen. He held it out to the side, draped over his arm, an offering rather than an imposition. It's 41 degrees out here. This weighs about 10 pounds. It'll keep you warm until we figure out what happens next. Owen looked at the vest. He looked at Everett. He shifted the pillow to one arm, the first time he'd loosened his grip on it, and he took the vest, and he put it over his shoulders, and he pulled it closed with one hand, and held the pillow with the other, and the combined weight of the leather, and the pillow, and the 10 pounds of patches and pins, and a man's identity settled onto an 11-year-old frame that weighed maybe 85 pounds, and the boy stood a little straighter under it, because weight, when it's the right kind, doesn't push you down. It holds you up. Everett called Kanawha County 911 at 2:14 a.m. He reported a juvenile male, approximately 11, walking on Route 3 southbound, reporting domestic abuse and unlawful confinement at the mother's residence in South Charleston. He gave the address Owen provided, a house on a residential street near the Kanawha City Bridge. Gage's Road King appeared from the north 7 minutes later, headlight cutting the dark. Then switch from the south. Then Ballpeen and Coupler riding together, their engines rumbling low through the valley. Then Crosty, last, rolling in with his hazards on because he'd been behind a slow semi on the bridge. 5 motorcycles on the shoulder of Route 3 at 2:25 in the morning. 5 men in vests standing on the breakdown lane. 1 boy with a pillow. The chemical plant stacks blinked red across the river. The Kanawha ran somewhere in the dark, carrying whatever rivers carry at that hour. Water, history, the accumulated runoff of a valley that had been working since before the highway was built. If Asphalt Angels has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Just a couple bucks a month keeps these stories coming. Links below. Now, back to the ending. The sheriff's unit went to the South Charleston address at 2:31 a.m. The house was a two-story on a residential street near the Kanawha City Bridge, the kind of house that looks fine from the curb, vinyl siding, trimmed bushes, a car in the driveway, the kind of house that keeps its damaged interior. Todd Michael Vickers, 39, was asleep on the couch. The television, a replacement for the one he'd broken the previous week, a 50-inch flat screen that he'd bought the next day as though the purchase erased the event, was on, tuned to nothing, casting blue light across a living room that showed no visible signs of violence, because Todd was the kind of man who cleaned up after himself, who patched the drywall and replaced the remote and bought a new TV and maintained the appearance of a household that functioned normally while installing a slide bolt on a child's bedroom door. The basement door had a slide bolt mounted on the outside at adult height, the kind of hardware you put on a gate or a shed door, not on an interior door to a child's bedroom. The basement window was open, pushed outward on its hinge, the screen popped out, and leaning against the foundation, the grass beneath it pressed flat from the landing of an 85-pound boy in sneakers and gym shorts carrying a pillow. Owen's room was in the basement. A bed with no pillow was against the far wall. A bookshelf with no books. Todd had thrown them away weeks ago, one shelf at a time, telling Owen he had too much junk and that junk attracted mice and that mice were Owen's fault. The room smelled like basement, damp concrete, stored paint, the underground smell that becomes normal when you sleep in it long enough. Owen's mother, Crystal Meade, was in the master bedroom. She had fingerprint bruises on both upper arms, the marks of a man who grabs and squeezes to make a point without leaving the kind of evidence that shows in a t-shirt. She was awake. She'd been awake since Owen's door had been locked at 9. She'd heard the basement window slide open 3 hours earlier, and she'd heard her son climb out, and she'd lain in bed and done nothing, because doing something meant walking past Todd on the couch, and Todd was between her and the basement, and Todd was between her and everything. The deputy asked her, "Did you know your son left?" "Yes." "You didn't try to stop him?" "I couldn't get to him. Todd was on the couch. The only way to the basement is past the couch." Owen knew that. That's why he went out the window. Where was he going? To his father's. Owen always says he's going to walk to his dad's house. I thought it was just something he said. I didn't think he'd actually do it. She paused. Then, he took his pillow. He always said he'd take his pillow. That's how I knew he meant it this time. Todd Vickers was arrested. Domestic assault, unlawful imprisonment of a minor, child endangerment. The slide bolt on the basement door was photographed, measured, and entered into evidence. It had been installed with 3-inch deck screws driven through the door frame, the kind of screws you use for outdoor construction, the kind designed to hold against weather and weight, not the kind you use on an interior door unless you want that door to stay closed against something stronger than a child's hands. Owen's father, Darren Meade, lived in Nitro, 11 miles south, exactly where Owen had been walking. Darren was called at 2:45 a.m. He arrived at the Kanawha County Sheriff's Station at 3:20. He walked in wearing work boots and a Carhartt jacket over a t-shirt, and the expression of a man who had been woken from sleep by the sentence, "Your son was picked up walking on Route 3 at 2 a.m. He saw Owen sitting in a plastic chair next to a deputy's desk, wearing a biker's leather vest over gym shorts and a t-shirt, the pillow on his lap. Darren crouched in front of the chair. He looked at the pillow. He looked at Owen. He put one hand on the pillow, on the object, not on the boy, because Darren understood that the pillow was the bridge between them, and the bridge needed to be acknowledged before the crossing could begin. You walked. I walked. 11 miles. I didn't make it to 11. I made it to mile marker 37. A biker stopped. He turned around and came back. You brought the pillow. I always said I would. You said I could take one thing. I took the one thing. Darren's eyes closed. His hand tightened on the pillow. Owen leaned forward in the chair and pressed his forehead against his father's forehead. The contact point of two people who share a geometry, who fit together in a way that can't be replicated. And they stayed like that, foreheads touching, the pillow between them, until Darren said, "You're never walking back." Owen said, "I know." Emergency custody was granted to Darren within 72 hours. Owen lives in Nitro now, in his father's house, in a room with a door that locks from the inside, with a turn lock that Owen controls, with a bed that has a pillow on it, the same pillow, the one he carried 11 miles down a highway in the dark because it smelled like home and he wasn't leaving it behind. Crystal entered a shelter program. She's in counseling. She calls Owen twice a week on a phone that belongs to her and that nobody monitors, and that she keeps in her pocket at all times, because after 5 months of having a phone that was checked and controlled and sometimes taken away, the act of carrying a phone that is entirely hers feels like the first real thing she's owned since Todd moved in. She told the counselor once, "I knew he was going to walk. I knew it for months. He told me." He said, "Mom, one night I'm going to walk to Dad's house and I'm going to take my pillow." And I thought he was just talking. Kids say things. But he wasn't just talking. He was planning. And I couldn't stop it because I couldn't get past the couch. The couch was between me and my son, and Todd was on the couch, and the couch was the whole world. The Blackjaw MC of Kanawha County, West Virginia, now sponsors a program called Pillow Walk. In partnership with schools, shelters, and family resource centers across Kanawha, Putnam, and Cabell counties, they provide emergency overnight bags to kids in crisis, a backpack containing a pillow, a blanket, a flashlight, a prepaid phone with 3 numbers programmed in, and a card that reads, "You don't have to walk. Call this number. Somebody will come." The idea came from Owen. Everett had asked him, at a Blackjaw cookout, where Owen was eating a burger and wearing a Blackjaw MC t-shirt that Gage had ordered for him, "If you could go back to that night, what would you change?" Owen said, "I'd have had a phone. I didn't have a phone because Todd took it. If I'd had a phone, I wouldn't have had to walk, but I still would have taken the pillow." Owen Mead is 12 now. He rides his bike to school in Nitro on a road with a sidewalk and a speed limit of 25. His room is on the 2nd floor, not a basement, never a basement again, with a window that looks out over the backyard and opens from the inside and has never been his only exit. His door has a lock, a turn lock, on the inside. He controls it. His room has a bookshelf, rebuilt because Todd threw the books away and Darren replaced every one of them, plus 40 new ones, because Darren went to the library and asked the librarian what an 11-year-old boy should read, and the librarian gave him a list, and he bought the list. The bookshelf is full now. It's the fullest thing in the room. Owen keeps the pillow on his bed. It doesn't smell like his dad's house anymore. It smells like his house, because the house is his now, and the pillow has absorbed the new address the way pillows absorb everything: sweat, tears, sleep, the slow accumulation of nights where the door stays unlocked and nobody is yelling through the floor, and the quiet is just quiet, not the absence of yelling, but the presence of peace. Everett still rides Route 3 on Thursday nights. He still takes the straightaway past mile marker 37 at 55. And every time his headlight sweeps the breakdown lane, he looks, not for debris, not for deer, but for the thing he found at 2:07 in the morning, on a night when the temperature was 41 degrees and the river was running in the dark, and a boy was walking toward the only place that smelled like safety, carrying the only proof he had that it existed. Be the one who turns around. Thank you for watching this story. If it reminded you that a pillow isn't just a pillow, sometimes it's the only thing a kid takes when he decides to walk toward home, please share it. Subscribe to Asphalt Angels for more stories proving that the highway between a house and a home is sometimes 11 miles long, and sometimes it takes a biker to close the distance. Tell us in the comments, what would you carry?